The house at the end of our street, nothing special about it. Small ranch-style home, white siding, two-car garage, neatly trimmed lawn. The kind of place you drive past 1,000 times without remembering it. But for nearly 8 months, the porch light never turned off, and eventually people started asking why. I moved into the neighborhood in late spring. My wife and I had just bought our first house, quiet area, mostly older couples and young families. The sort of neighborhood where everyone waved but nobody really knew each other. The house at the end of the street belonged to a man named Walter. At least that's what I was told. I never met him. Nobody seemed to. Every morning when I left work, the porch light was on. Every evening when I came home, it was on. Middle of the day, middle of the night, didn't matter. It was always on. At first I assumed it was a burned out sensor, or maybe Walter was forgetful. Not exactly a mystery. Then one afternoon I was talking to my next door neighbor, an older woman named Linda. While we were chatting, she glanced toward Walter's house, then casually said, "Funny thing is, I've never actually seen him." I laughed, then realized she wasn't joking. Apparently she lived there for 3 years. She'd seen delivery trucks, mail carriers, lawn services, but never Walter, not once. That seemed impossible. People have to leave eventually, right? That seemed impossible. People have to leave eventually, right? The conversation stuck with me. After that, I started noticing things. The mailbox filled up often, then emptied. Packages arrived, then disappeared. Trash cans rolled to the curb, then returned. Clearly somebody was living there, yet nobody seemed to see who. One evening, I mentioned it to another neighbor. He immediately knew which house I meant. He told me something strange. A few months earlier, he knocked on Walter's door by mistake while looking for a lost dog. No answer, but he heard movement inside. Footsteps. Someone walking slowly, back and forth, back and forth. The person never answered, never looked through the window, never spoke, just paced. That bothered him enough that he eventually left. As summer passed, more stories appeared. None dramatic, just odd. People heard footsteps. People noticed curtains move. People saw lights change rooms. Yet nobody actually saw the homeowner. By autumn, the house had become a neighborhood mystery. The kind people discussed while walking dogs. Nothing sinister, just strange. Then the police showed up. Not because of the house, because of a burglary nearby. Officers went door to door asking residents if they had security footage, including Walter's. One officer knocked repeatedly. No answer. Eventually they left. But the next day something changed. For the first time since I moved there, the porch light was off. The entire house sat dark. That should have been meaningless. Instead it felt wrong, almost unsettling, like something familiar had disappeared. The light remained off for 3 days, then suddenly came back on. Exactly as before, day and night, never turning off. Winter arrived. The mystery continued. Then came a snowstorm, a heavy one, the kind that buries cars and shuts down roads. Most people stayed home. I spent the day looking out the window, watching snow pile up. At some point I noticed something strange. No footprints. Not around Walter's house, not around the mailbox, not to the garage, not to the front door, nothing. For nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, there was no tracks anywhere on the property. Yet that night, that porch light remained on, and smoke rose from the chimney. I walked down there the next morning, mostly out of curiosity. Maybe there was another entrance. Maybe I'd missed something. There wasn't. The snow remained untouched, perfect, unbroken. That was the first time I genuinely felt uneasy. A week later, I called the city, not because I thought something bad happened, because I thought maybe someone should perform a welfare check, just to be safe. 2 officers arrived that afternoon. They knocked, no answer. Again, no answer. Eventually they entered. The entire street watched. Police remained inside nearly 2 hours. Then more vehicles arrived. Detectives, crime scene personnel, a medical examiner. The neighborhood exploded with rumors. Nobody knew what happened. A few days later, the truth came out. Walter had died months earlier, possibly much earlier. Natural causes, nothing criminal, nothing violent. The reason nobody saw him? Because nobody had. The house had been running almost entirely on automation. Automatic bill pay, automatic deliveries, automatic lighting schedules, automatic thermostat controls. Even the trash service had been arranged through a local company. The pacing footsteps neighbor heard? A robotic vacuum. The moving curtains? Air vents. the changing lights, timers. For months, an empty house had continued behaving as though someone lived there. That should be the end of it. A sad story, nothing more. But one detail never sat right with me. Remember the porch light? The one that turned off for 3 days after police knocked? Investigators eventually discovered why. Someone had logged into the home smart system remotely. 3 separate times after Walter's death. Not family, not police, not the utility company. Someone unknown. They adjusted settings, checked camera feeds, viewed security logs, then disappeared. Nobody ever identified them. And that's the part I think about. Because for months, everyone assumed somebody was living inside that house. Maybe nobody was. Or maybe somebody was checking in just often enough to make sure it looked that way. Even now when I drive through that neighborhood, the house is occupied by a new family. Kids play outside, cars fill the driveway, everything looks normal. But sometimes I remember that winter, that untouched snow, that empty house, and the fact that somewhere out there, someone was still watching it long after its owner was gone. The garage door opened every night at exactly 11:17. Not around 11:17, not close to 11:17, exactly 11:17, every single night for almost a year. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Then I started setting my watch by it. Eventually I called the police. I wish I hadn't. The house sat directly across from mine. Small, older, nothing remarkable. The owner was a man named Frank, retired, widowed, quiet, the kind of neighbor you wave at but never really knew. Frank kept mostly to himself. Mowed his lawn, collected his mail, occasionally sat on the porch. Normal stuff. The only unusual thing was the garage. Every night at 11:17, the garage door would slowly open, remain open for roughly 20 minutes, then close. No vehicles entered, no vehicles left. Nobody walked in, nobody walked out. Just open, then closed. The first few times I noticed it, I assumed Frank was taking out the trash, or checking something, or forgot to shut it. Then I noticed the pattern. Exactly 11:17, every night. Rain, snow, weekends, holidays. It didn't matter. One evening I mentioned it to my wife. She noticed it too. A month later, several neighbors were talking about it. Apparently half the street had. Nobody knew why. Nobody wanted to ask. The thing about weird routines is that eventually they stop feeling weird. You get used to them. The garage became background noise. Part of the neighborhood, like a church bell. Until Frank disappeared. At least that's what we thought. Nobody saw him for weeks, then months. His lawn started getting longer. Packages accumulated. Newspapers piled up. Every night, 11:17, the garage door opened, then closed 20 minutes later, exactly like before. People began speculating. Vacation, hospital stay, moved away, maybe there's a family emergency. Everyone had theories. But eventually the city posted a notice on the front door. Nobody responded. Then another notice. Still nothing. Yet every night, 11:17, open, 20 minutes later, close. The entire thing became unsettling. Not because it was dramatic, because it was so precise. One night I decided to watch, like really watch. At 11:15 I sat by the window, lights off, coffee beside me. 11:16, nothing. 11:17, the garage door began rising, slowly, mechanically, exactly as expected. The interior appeared dark and empty. Then something moved, just briefly, near the back wall. I sat forward, trying to focus. The motion vanished immediately. The garage remained open, silent, still. 20 minutes later, it closed. The next night, I watched again. Same result, except this time I was certain something had moved. Not a person, not exactly. A shadow, a shape. Something shifting near shelves at the rear. I convinced myself it was imagination. Bad lighting, nothing more. Then the police finally entered the property. Several officers arrived during daylight. A locksmith opened the front door. They spent hours inside. Neighbors gathered outside pretending not to stare. Eventually one officer approached a group of us. He didn't reveal much, only that Frank wasn't there. That should have been reassuring. Instead it made things worse. Because if Frank wasn't there, who was opening the garage? That night everyone watched. Literally everyone. The porches were full. Curtains moved. People waited. 11:17, the garage opened. Several neighbors actually gasped, because now we knew the house was supposed to be empty. Yet the routine continued. The next morning, police returned, this time with detectives. 3 days later, the truth emerged. Frank had died nearly 8 months earlier, natural causes. The reason nobody discovered him sooner was because he hadn't died inside the house. He passed away while visiting relatives out of state. The home remained vacant afterwards, at least officially. Investigators eventually discovered the garage opener had been connected to a programmable smart home controller. Years earlier, Frank had set dozens of automated routines. Lights, thermostats, garage schedules, everything. One of those routines opened the garage nightly. Mystery solved, right? Not quite. Because while reviewing security footage from neighboring homes, detectives found something. Every single night after the garage opened, someone entered. Not through the front, not through the back, through the garage. The same person, a hooded figure, always arriving on foot, always appearing from the wooded trail behind the subdivision, always leaving before the garage closed. Investigators never publicly released everything they found, but rumors spread quickly. Apparently, the individual had been using the vacant property as a meeting place, storage location, maybe more. Nobody knew how long it had been happening. Nobody knew how the person discovered the garage schedule. What bothered me most was something else. The footage showed the hooded figure arriving every night at 11:16, not 11:18, not 11:20, 11:16, 1 minute before the garage opened. Like they knew exactly when it would happen. Which means somebody had been watching the house for a very long time, long enough to learn every routine, long enough to trust it. The property was eventually sold, the automation system removed, the garage stopped opening. Life went back to normal. But sometimes when I'm awake at night, I remember that empty house, that dark garage, that person stepping out of the woods at the exact right moment, and I wondered something. What would have happened if the routine had never changed? If nobody had called? If nobody had noticed? If the garage had continued open every night forever? Because whoever was using that house wasn't breaking in. They didn't need to. The door was open for them. The first thing I noticed was the lamp. Not because there was anything unusual about it, because it was never turned off. Day or night, rain or shine, that lamp stayed on. At first, it was just one of those random details you notice when you live somewhere long enough. By the time I moved out, it was part of a police investigation, and I still don't know exactly what happened in that apartment. This happened 3 years ago when I lived in a large apartment complex outside Columbus. Nothing fancy, 3-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard. My apartment faced another building directly across from mine. Close enough that if both windows were open, you could hear conversations. Not close enough to see details inside. At least not usually. I worked from home back then. Data entry. Boring stuff. The kind of job where your eyes eventually wander towards the window just because you're desperate for something more interesting than spreadsheets. That's how I started noticing apartment 3C. The lamp sat beside a window. A small yellow lamp. Every morning it was on. Every afternoon it was on. Every night it was on. At first I figured the tenant forgot about it. Then days became weeks. Weeks became months. Still on. One afternoon I mentioned it to my neighbor Sarah. She laughed, then immediately stopped, because she'd noticed it too. Apparently everyone on our side of the courtyard had. Nobody thought much about it. Just one of those weird things people do. A few weeks later, something changed. The lamp was still on, but now there was a chair beside it, positioned directly toward the window, facing outward. I remember seeing it and thinking it looked strange. Like someone wanted a perfect view of the courtyard. The chair remained there for days. Then weeks. Never moved. Always facing outside. The weird part? I never saw anyone sitting in it. Not once. One evening around 9, I happened to glance outside while microwaving dinner. For a second I thought someone was finally sitting there. A silhouette. Motionless. Dark. Watching. I walked closer to the window, and the figure disappeared. I assumed it was a trick of shadows, nothing more. A few nights later, I saw it again. Same chair, same position, same silhouette. Except this time I watched longer, nearly 5 minutes. The figure never moved, not even slightly. No shifting, no scratching, not looking around, nothing. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I walked across the courtyard, not to spy, just to satisfy myself. Apartment 3C was on the third floor. The blinds were partially open. From below, I could see the chair, and sitting in it was a mannequin. I actually laughed. The mystery suddenly seemed ridiculous. Somebody had put a mannequin in the chair facing the window. Problem solved, or so I thought. That night, the mannequin was gone. The chair remained, the lamp remained, but the mannequin was gone. The next evening, it was back, different position, now angled slightly toward another building. That's when it stopped feeling funny, because mannequins don't move themselves. And despite all the time I spent looking toward that apartment, I'd never seen anyone enter or leave. I started paying more attention, not intentionally. The apartment just became impossible to ignore. Eventually, I noticed something else. Packages. Lots of them. Boxes appeared outside the door almost daily, but they never stayed long. Whenever I checked later, they'd be gone. Yet I never saw anyone retrieve them. Then came the night that changed everything. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty. I walked into the kitchen, looked out the window, and froze. The lamp was off. For the first time, the apartment was completely dark. I don't know why that bothered me. It shouldn't have. Normal people turn off lights. Normal apartments go dark. Yet after months of seeing the lamp glowing every night, its absence felt wrong. Then I noticed movement. Inside, somebody crossed the front window, quickly. Too quickly to identify. Just a shadow. Gone almost immediately. The next morning, police cars arrived. 3 of them. The entire courtyard buzzed with rumors. Nobody knew what happened. Nobody got answers. Police entered apartment 3C and remained there for hours. Crime scene tape appeared by noon. Management refused to explain anything. Residents speculated endlessly. Drug activity, domestic dispute, medical emergency. Everyone had theories, but nobody had facts. 2 weeks later, the apartment was emptied. Furniture removed, carpet replaced, fresh paint, new locks. Life turned to normal, eventually. Then Sarah called me one evening. She'd been talking to a maintenance worker, someone who had entered the apartment after police finished. According to him, the tenant of 3C had died months earlier. Natural causes, nothing suspicious. The problem was, nobody realized it. Utilities were on autopay, rent was on autopay. Packages continued arriving from subscription services. The lamp remained on. Everything looked occupied. The mannequin? Apparently it wasn't a mannequin, at least not originally. The tenant had been an artist. He used articulated display figures as references for drawings. Several were positioned throughout the apartment. One happened to sit near the window. The maintenance worker swore he saw photographs inside. Thousands of photographs, all taken through the apartment window. Photos of the courtyard, photos of neighbors, photos of people walking dogs, photos of children playing, photos spanning years. And that's the part I think about most. Because every day I worked beside my own window. Every day I ate lunch there. Every day I sat in view of apartment 3C. And somewhere inside that apartment, someone had been watching, long before anyone realized they were gone.